first, let me give you some background on our keynote, Mary Lou Jepsen, okay? She is the CEO and founder of Open Water, which is a breakthrough medical technology company. And the things that Mary is doing, really, again, this theme of helping the world and driving innovation to provide great solutions. This is what Mary is all about. Not only has she been named one of the 100 most influential people in the world by Time magazine, and she's also CNN's top 10 thinkers in science and technology, but she also has over 250 patents published under her name. How many folks have patents here? All right, fantastic. All right, so 250 patents, that just blows my mind. I mean, I can tell you right now that I know how to bribe a 13-year-old, but that's about it. I don't have any patents. And you just give them Roblox time, and they're fine, right? But it's not the same thing. All right. Previously, Dr. Jepsen served as the executive director of engineering at Facebook, and she has also held similar roles at Google. So let's have a big LG Nova hand. Let's bring out Mary Lou. Big hand. Come on, everybody. Fantastic.
Awesome. It's just awesome to be here. In person after so long. This is incredible. I'm so excited to see what you're doing out there. I wanted to talk to you. I've founded a bunch of startups and ended up as an executive in big companies. And I think what's fundamental to changing the world, which we all want to do, is figuring out how to dance with elephants. A lot of ideas start as little nuggets of an idea with small people trying to do the impossible. But to actually make it happen, you have to collaborate widely so that you can change the world at scale, and it's not always easy. So I have a 35-year career now in doing this sometimes, and sometimes not quite achieving that. So I wanted to talk to you about some of the lessons from that and hope that they're helpful. So this is sort of a joke. Oh, sorry, that was the first slide. Second slide, Neil Stephenson, the prolific science fiction writer, helped us kick off the Moonshot division of Google. And he came and started with this line. I saw the best minds of my generation writing spam filters. It's a riff on a very famous book from the 50s, but it's kind of accurate, right? People still are writing spam filters. They're important, but we could do more. We could do more than create spam and then filter it. We could make a better world. There are really big problems to solve. Pick one. Education, healthcare, the environment, world peace. You're not going to do any of them from a startup, but a lot of times they're going to start in a startup, and you have to scale them. The real solutions tend to involve lots of people at lots of different scales. What we're trying to do, what I've based my life on, it's really fun to work on the impossible, because everybody knows it's impossible. But our challenge is to make the impossible possible at scale. So lately, for the past 6 years, I've taken my experience in consumer electronics, shipping all kinds of laptops, cell phones, big screen TVs, VR, AR, and so forth, and applied it to transforming healthcare. One of the problems with healthcare, it's not evenly distributed, it's way too expensive for good healthcare, and I saw a lot of opportunity for this, and it really came when I was prepping with LG Nova for this talk. They said, talk about your failures. I'm like, whoa, get up on stage and talk about my failures. Well, my biggest failure by far was my body in my 20s. Gave out my mind. I was doing my PhD in physics. I pioneered all kinds of really interesting physics, holographic video systems, huge holograms, all kinds of different things. But I was getting progressively sicker. I was living in a wheelchair. I was sleeping 20 hours a day, body full of sores. I couldn't move half my face. I drooled because it felt like Novocaine. And then the worst part happened. I could no longer subtract. And so I didn't think I deserved a PhD from an Ivy League school. And they had let me see the professors at that school. It was a med school, it was a good med school. So I called up my parents and said, hey, can I have my childhood room and come home and die? And they said, okay. And then on the way out, a professor sprung for the cost of one of these, and I got magic. I got a diagnosis. It was a brain tumor. I found a really good brain surgeon. I had the brain surgery. A month later, I petitioned to get back into grad school. I'm not proud. I had a brain tumor excuse, and it worked. I got the empathy vote, finished my PhD in 6 months, but really had to recreate my brain. And so in terms of failure, everything else seems small relative to that. And so there's all these things that happen to you, get knocked down all the time, but compared to being knocked down like that, yeah, what did I do wrong? How could I do better? Sure, maybe it was 80% the other people's fault, but there's always things you can learn and do better. And I really take that unusual experience of having a brain tumor to really finally get to the point where, given the roles that I've had, I didn't really need any more money. I'm not a billionaire or anything, but how much money do you need to spend? I just thought, nobody sees that perhaps we could use the exponential technologies of our time, the way Moore's Law is hitting sensors and laser technologies to leapfrog the resolution of this baby and make a diagnostic therapeutic system that blows it away. And so, could it fail? Sure. Absolutely, 100% it could fail, but for sure it's going to fail if nobody tries it. So someone has to try it. I was deeply motivated, and so I tried it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this later in the talk, but 5 years later, we're starting with the head and revolutionizing both neurotherapies and diagnostics that have profound implications for most diseases of the brain, from stroke to cancer to mental disease to neurodegenerative disease, in a small, wearable device that can be at volume production, less than the cost of a smartphone, and use the very factories that are being used to produce smartphone, next generation VR and AR, as well as LiDAR technologies. So slipstreaming on some of that technology, but applying it to a completely different area. Bizarrely, it's really rare to use physics in medicine because doctors know biochemistry really well. So their first line treatment is often pharmaceuticals. So, go to where you're rare is one of my advices. Here's a place that's very rare. I built this laptop in the mid-2000s, started in 2005, $100 laptop, ha ha ha. Laptops at that time cost $2,000, and when you bought them, you needed $2,000 more worth of software to make them useful. So how's anybody going to make a $100 laptop? It was a joke. Nobody believed it was possible. But I'd never made a laptop before, so I didn't know it was impossible. I'd made a lot of screen technology, and at that point, the screen was the most expensive thing by far in a device. They didn't even consider them part of hardware then. My background's actually in electrical engineering, physics, and computer science, and so forth. But it's strange that the most expensive component wasn't even considered hardware. So there's an advantage, again, from coming where they don't come from to try to do that. When you look in this picture, do you see any electricity? So this laptop powered itself with a small hand crank, and do you see how it's being used outside? These kids, my customers, half of the world's children live without steady, ready access to electricity. And in one room, family in one room, guess where the kids are? Outside. So it's got a sunlight readable screen, super high resolution. We created the first keyboards for many languages, including Amharic, which 100 million people speak in Ethiopia. That was just a side project. We wrote the standard for mesh networking to enable all of the laptops to be a communication system in the village, even if the village wasn't connected to the internet as it was supposed to be. But really, you could change the equation if you can lower the cost of a laptop over 5 years to the cost of textbooks. And that's what we did and went at scale. But to get to that, how were we? I was a professor at MIT then, and I started One Laptop Per Child with another professor, the much more famous Nicholas Negroponte, who founded the MIT Media Lab, honorary co-founder of Wired magazine, many best-selling books, a true technology visionary, but it was just us. You can't make a laptop without a factory, and you need permission. And so there was lots of times in rooms like this. And if you can get into rooms like this, I got into rooms like this. Usually the CEO of a huge company on the other side of the table, flanked by 4 EVPs on one side, another 4 SVPs on the other side. And I'd go into the room, just me. They didn't need to know our organization was only 2 people then. That would have been too much for them, but just me. And they'd start laughing hysterically. $100 laptop, ha, 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 it'll never work. And the women in the audience will get the gender dynamic here. So what I did, and it was really successful, this is why I tell you, is I pulled out a notebook and I'm like, okay, tell me why it won't work. It's somewhat useful when you're trying to do the impossible to hear it's impossible, but what would be really helpful is why they think it's impossible. And that could be just because no one's ever done it. Okay, fine, but why is that? And so over the next 90 minutes in this first meeting, they let it be 23 things they listed that would make it impossible. I had already 16, 17 of those solved, but there was a new 6 or so that were really good. These guys knew a lot about consumer electronics, so I said to them, look, I'm going to take this back to the team. Again, the team then was just me, but they really didn't need to, that detail wasn't relevant. We're going to work on it, and can I come back to you in 3 months? And then I just started meeting with other people who really wanted this to happen, understood it could transform education, were willing to take my meeting until the manufacturer said yes. And what happened then is we created this not-for-profit with a multi-billion-dollar revenue that became the fastest-growing consumer electronic category ever recorded, and fundamentally changed opportunities for education for children in the developing world, and changed what a minister of education could do in a low or middle income country for their kids. So what's happened to that now? Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, cites that the progeny of this is really the Chromebook. So we did this as an impulse function, as a not-for-profit, selling them at cost, $100. Minister of Education would buy them, give them to the kids in bulk. Every kid in Uruguay still has one of my laptops. Half the kids in Rwanda, huge deployments in Peru, all over the world, really. We shipped simultaneously to 200 countries. But I sat there after that, and I'm like, what am I doing at MIT? There aren't enough MIT professors sleeping on the factory floors to make things that can ship at scale. So I left. But you know, I think one thing that really got to me, the real change, is how you affect kids. And I'd get lots of notes like this note from Badmus, who is now all grown up. This is from 2006. If you have access to the tools of our time, both for information and for communication, it changes what you are able to do. When you're in a discussion and the answer is, because we always did it that way, maybe you can find other ways to do it and suggest them and move it forward. So in the case of the laptop, it wasn't really a laptop. The Trojan horse was the laptop, the kids, empowering the kids to ask questions and continue to, you stop learning when you stop asking questions, when you stop asking why, and to continue that. So there's other things that I then did when I moved to Asia full-time, including, does anybody wish that they could see their laptop screen outside or their cell phone screen? It's totally possible. Made a company to do it. We sold a lot to military construction workers and point of sale. Boy, I wish that we had that. I even called up some of my friends at Google and like, look, I'll do it for free. Throw it in a Chromebook. But the other thing that really gets me, do you want your batteries to last longer or less long? How many want them to last longer? How many less long? Well, you voted. Apple won, and they last less long. If you really look at like those Nokia cell phones from the early 2000s, a single charge would last a week, literally a week. The screens that we put on the cell phones made the power consumption higher. Totally possible to make that laptop I made for children in the developing world that didn't have electricity, that you could charge with a little hand crank or even other things. Totally possible to do that technology, but Apple, Apple won, and the question is, can that pendulum swing back? I thought it would swing back more during pandemic, but it hasn't yet. Stuff on the cutting room floor. I got lots of stuff on the cutting room floor. I projected a system on the moon from Moon TV, which maybe wasn't the best idea, so I let go of that. But lots of different laptops and cell phones and virtual reality systems and augmented reality systems that haven't hit at scale. And that's the norm in a career, but you take the experience from it. You have some, for a baseball analogy, some solid singles where you get the thing out, make some money. It's actually rare to keep having home runs that get at scale. And so you can still learn a ton from it. I have another thing still on the cutting room floor. I did this at Google where Sergey Brin hired me to come do really innovative consumer electronics at Google from Asia. So I moved back to the Bay Area, I don't know, 2012-ish. And here's this, I have a lot of patents. Here's a simple patent that just gets rid of the seam between screens. So why would you want that? You'd want that because don't you want to be here where those walls are screens and you can have $1 million view or a shared wall with your family or friends? I still want that rather than wearing something on your face. So I was happily working on this at Google. Actually, I can't say what I did at Google, but my patents indicate I was happily working at this at Google, and there are a few leaks. But to do this, you need access to a lot of resources. So working with the big companies is very important to be able to do a project like this at scale. And then what happened really is Mark bought a company, Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook. He even changed the name of Facebook recently to Meta, but he bought a company called Oculus, and VR and AR that had gone dormant for like 15 years. I was a pioneer of virtual reality and augmented reality in the 80s and 90s. Was back on. Palmer Luckey, amazing founder of Oculus, had gotten a bunch of really high-end gamers like John Markoff, really excited about revisiting what we can do with modern displays and processors, built some pretty compelling prototypes, had a Kickstarter, and wow, everybody was excited. Mark bought it for a few $1 billion. I had dinner with Mark. He's so serious. I mean, look, he changed. And I'm like, okay, I'll come help you because this is a dream. And, here's the thing. You might not believe in this, but think of it this way. Our digital lives, collectively as humanity, are maybe 3 decades old. Some people say it started in 1995. I've been online every day a decade longer, but call it 27 years. It seems like a long time, but humanity will forever be digital now. And do you really think this isn't happening? I don't think we're going to wear the shoebox on our face, but it's going to happen. Is it going to happen in 2 years, in 10 years, 50 years? Could it be longer than 50 years? How could it be longer than 50 years, given the amount of spending? It's going to happen. I think it's inevitable. So I went and helped, but I think we'd rather like exhale the display or think of the display, brain-computer interface and things like that, also our methods. So I created a team working on advanced concepts like you don't want to wear that, you want really retinal resolution, where while a large company, Cupertino, has coined that term, the retina actually has very high resolution in the center, it's called the fovea, and low resolution everywhere else. And so you can make a display where you can only need a megapixel or so on the back of the eye, and you can snake that screen through wherever the pupil is in your eye. If you just think of the retina as the projection screen and do the old Tyleable trick I was doing at Google, but in reverse. And so made a bunch of different things. Certainly have my foot handprints on the Oculus Quest 2, but there's a lot more coming. I don't know what they're announcing at their next announcement, but I think that it's going to happen. We could make it happen faster. Why not? But again, I saw that no one was looking at what the new technologies and the new manufacturing processes that were Facebook and other companies, LG probably, spending billions of dollars developing. No one was looking at how they could hit and transform healthcare. And I thought somebody should do this. Plus, all of those advances for LiDAR and lasers and detectors, I thought it was compelling. So 5 years later, as I mentioned, we have a device like this that's both a diagnostic and a therapeutic that has no ionizing radiation, no drugs, non-surgical, using phase wave chip technologies that we've developed. And we've gotten through a series of clinical trials now, deep in conversations with the FDA, looking at our first product at the end of next year through all the regulatory processes. But we're scanning patients daily in hospitals, mostly in the US right now. But first, why the brain? Does anyone in the audience, has anyone had a brain tumor, or anyone you love had a brain tumor? Raise your hands. Okay, keep your hands raised. Anybody, you or anyone you know, had a stroke? Anybody you love? Okay. What about mental disease? Keep the hands raised. Anybody with depression, OCD, et cetera? And neurodegenerative disease? You, anybody you love? Almost every hand is up. You know, this affects not just the person with disease, but the whole family, the whole society. And so little has been done effectively in the last decades. There's been 250 drugs approved for Alzheimer's. You know how many work? 0. $1 billion a pop for that. It's shocking. Nature last week published a study saying like Prozac, serotonin reuptake inhibitors are 2% better than placebo. A 40-year compilation of every study. It's shocking. So, you know, it's hard to get through the blood-brain barrier, but light and sound do. So can we use that and other things? But here's just a touch on, here's the staggering numbers just in America, just in the United States of America. There were 1 million strokes last year. There'll be 1 million strokes this year, 1 million strokes next year. Number 2 cause of death globally. 6 million people living with full-blown Alzheimer's, 15K people living with glioblastoma, and 25 million people with severe mental disease. It's staggering. The house is on fire. So our approach is to do something I've actually been doing my whole life, but it's rare, is to use the phase of the light and sound, not just the intensity, leveraging new chip technologies that are now available. And the manufacturing processes that have, as I said, been developed for next generation, high fidelity, virtual reality, and augmented reality and LiDAR. So new kinds of laser technologies, camera technologies, emitter technologies, ultrasound technologies that can be made in the chip factories of the world and are being made. So for example, every single one of you has a camera chip in your cell phone that costs $1. And it's $1 because it doesn't use much silicon area. And the byproduct of that is we just hit this discontinuity in physics. The pixel sizes on that camera chip are the size of the wavelength of light, which means we can record the waves and wavelength of light if we interfere them, like I'm showing here. So we interfere that light and we can read those waves much like a sailor can read the waves on the ocean and know where the fish are, where the land is, and so forth. We can get information about the brain by looking with math at those structures, which hasn't been done before. We also had to create a laser that was the size of a small room and cost $1 million 3 years ago, but we shrunk that down. Again, slipstreaming on LiDAR technology. That's the technology going into most cars that allow it to see really far ahead so you don't get into accidents and ultimately enables autonomous driving. That's really real. The other thing we do is we can craft the shape of the waves by using an emitter array, like on the yellow side, where those yellow emitters are all emitting the exact same wavelength, in this case of sound, but from one emitter to the next, the wave is slightly delayed. And with that, you can make a close focus of that beam, a far focus of the beam. You can use a similar principle to steer that beam right, left, up, down, anywhere you want to treat the disease where it is. And this is now possible using technologies that have acronyms, PMOT, CMOT, using another acronym, a MEMS process, that basically moves. It creates a movement of the silicon that moves the sound in a controlled way via the wavelength, and we can have this power. So we've built over the past few years, some new headsets that are trying to treat patients wherever they be that are in here's 2 different ones, and the ID of the one that we're putting together now. That's wearable, steerable, and it can predict and target the disease wherever it is. So here's an example of a disease we're treating, glioblastoma. It's a death sentence because little cells, even if you get the neurosurgery, little cells hide out in between the neurons. So does the neurosurgeon pull all your neurons out? Well, then you wouldn't have a brain. So they leave them there, but they divide really quickly. But they have a property that's different than healthy cells. They have a brittle cell membrane, a different cytoplasm, a different nucleus, and they're so fast dividing, they're like a rickety ship on the water. And so that brittleness can be exploited, much like an opera singer at a certain frequency can burst this glass, but nothing else in the room is damaged, not even your eardrum that can hear that sound. It's just the glass because that's brittle and weak. And we do that with the glioblastoma cells without harming the neurons. So here are these orange cells are the glioblastoma cells, and they start resonating when we send in the right frequency of ultrasound. We don't even focus it here. We couple it through the skull. Speed of sound changes in skull from tissue, so we compensate for that. The skull isn't spherical. There's little bumps on it. We compensate for that. But then we just spread it in so that we can vibrate these, and then sort of zooming in, we continue that until those cells burst. And what they do then is spread proteins throughout the brain. They don't damage the neurons, but they vaccinate against the very cancer that you have, so the immune system can go out and then kill any cells we might have missed. So it's so exciting. What we did to test this, and this is really new, I don't think I've ever shown this slide publicly before, is we tried this out. So we built up, as one does, some human brain organoids in Petri dishes and gave them different kinds of glioblastoma and applied we actually did a sweep of what's the right frequency, intensity, pulse sequence, and compared to the best chemotherapy lines of Temodar and Gem, and did 5 times better. This is the first experiment. We've now fine-tuned and found the best frequencies and pulse sequences where we're totally destroying that brain organoid, which is pictured on the left-hand side. Left? And you can see where there's red in the image of the one below, the green one. That's basically staining for the dead glio cells without harming the healthy tissues. So right now we're growing up some mice with glioblastoma and getting the sequence right. We could be in humans on this in 6 to 12 months, because as I mentioned, it is a death sentence. It's very promising. The thing I didn't tell you is the intensity level. Lower than used on pregnant women and their fetuses for diagnostic purposes for the last 50 years. It's just the glioblastoma cells are really weak. Why didn't anybody see this before? There's mentions of it in the literature, but nobody, the emphasis is really on pharmaceuticals, again, not physics. So we could be shipping soon in the US through the FDA. We may go faster in other countries. We'll see. But we could be, I guess, mice this fall, then going into non-human primates, and then hopefully an IRB trial on humans to see how we do as we walk through that in safety. But this could be applied to all aggressive cancers, pancreatic cancer, bladder cancer, breast cancer, and on, because they all have that property of really rigid cell membranes. And so it's really interesting that as a display engineer, I'm coming in and with my team, an incredible group of people that invented a lot of this, we're having this incredible early impact. But our first product, Glio might be the first product, but we have this other product. 2 months ago, I would have told you this was our first product. And so I have a question. Why does stroke kill and disable so many? Number 2 killer in the world. I mean, it's 90% of the time it's a clot. We have a treatment to remove the clot for a small clot and take a drug for a big clot. You snake a catheter up and pull it out with a piece of steel wool. So why is it the number 2 killer? The answer is it's a time to diagnosis crisis. If you can get the patient from stroke onset to therapy within 2 hours, there's a 90% chance of no neural deficit whatsoever. So what happens to these usually is the ambulance comes, the patient's on the ground, passed out, wake them up, they're slurring their words. Is the patient drunk? Is he on drugs? Just fell to have a stroke? All 4 are possible. So if the patient, you bring them to the ER, they wait behind the gunshot victims, the stabbing victims, the heart attack victims, because it's apparent what those patients have. It's not apparent what this patient has. To get that diagnosis, you need to get that patient in an MRI scanner or a CT scanner, and that, at hour 8, hour 10, you're diagnosing it. So you might get to have a thrombectomy then for a big stroke, but you're still not going to walk or talk again. You may not go home again. You're certainly not going to have a job again. And if we could just catch it earlier, so there's actually, a stroke is defined by right-left hemisphere blood flow difference. So like in a heart attack, you can put an EKG on your chest and figure out if there's a heart attack. So why can't we just put an EKG on our forehead? Well, you can, but that's not going to measure blood flow. So you have to make something that measures blood flow. So that's what we did. There is a little window where you can use ultrasound to measure blood flow, but 20% of people don't have that thinner window. So what we do is we made this laser that pulses, is really coherent, so we can make holograms on it. And the laser light, it's infrared. It goes through the skin, the skull, the brain. Much like the invention of fire was so key to humanity. We sat around a fire for millennia, and we could see the fire, but the fire warmed us because the infrared light goes through our body, the light we can't see. We're using infrared light here, but it's highly coherent, pulsed, so that we can make a hologram on this camera chip. And so while the light scatters through the whole body, when we put that $1 camera chip that records the interference fringes of the light, since we're recording the phase of the light, highly coherent means all the waves are just going in parallel rather than different colors of the wave. They're all precisely the same color. So here we see those interference fringes. Nothing's moving in the brain, so we get a nice, good, clear hologram. If we add in a faux blood vessel, you can see the red blood cells moving. The light is ricocheted around differently by those red blood cells. And so what you get is different contrast and different wave features on the camera chip. We use math to decode it, and from that, we can see the blood flow rate. And so we compare this artery to this artery. This artery, these are the anterior cerebral arteries, middle cerebral artery superior, middle cerebral artery inferior. Those are the places that are the worst places to have stroke. They kill or permanently make dependent the majority of people that have them. But if we can get them to a thrombectomy within 2 hours, 90% chance of no neural deficit. So that's what we're doing. Here you see what the camera image looks like. We can even see the pulsing, the boom, boom of your heart here. And there's so much information that we're now extracting from these. We're learning a lot more about what's happening in the vascular system. Can we see the stroke before it happens, before the clot blocks the blood? It causes turbulence. And so we're hoping we can do that. But for right now, we're concentrated on detecting the thrombectomy and getting people to care. There's a large reimbursable for that, over $1,000 per patient in the US, in Medicare, Medicaid. But it's too late by the time the diagnosis is done. But there's a lot more by seeing blood flow in your brain that we think is very interesting for treating disease. So here's what the raw data looks like. If I take that module I showed on one part of the forehead and spread it into the visor to get right-left hemisphere blood flow difference, you can see the red on these images is the left-hand side, and the blue is the right-hand side. But that's not what the EMT is going to look at. We look at blood flow and blood volume and look for differences. Large differences indicate it's a stroke. So we decode that, and the EMT sees this. They see it's a large vessel occlusion, and the doctor's already being summoned to the cath lab, and the team, the nurse, the anesthesiologist, the equipment's being put together. Somebody doing a thrombectomy has more information about their Uber Eats order than when the next patient, who every minute counts, gets their procedure. So they've got 20 minutes to get ready, they're ready to go, there's a room assigned, and so that can really make a huge difference. Again, we're going through the process with FDA, we're in scaled trials on that. At Penn, we're starting at Brown, which is the highest volume thrombectomy center in the country, because they have thrombectomies from the whole state. We start there next month, maybe this month, actually. It's just September just started. So, but that's not all. By using different resonant frequencies for the frequencies of neurons, we can make the neurons also vibrate so they can release or not release neurotransmitters. And if you think of the root of mental disease, whatever, you know, it's your parents, or it's your relationships, or it's your job, you're in a war. The end result, though, is either the neurons are firing too much or not enough, and we can change that. We're starting severe depression studies this fall, and I think Alzheimer's studies next year, where we can also, at different frequencies, get synapses to burst, synapses to grow, and also neurons to grow, treating them with different frequencies. We can reach through the forehead anywhere in the brain we wish to treat the disease where it is at, and we're doing this, again, at very low intensities, so it doesn't damage the tissue. So it's very strange to sort of come from this display queen kind of background, making all these displays, to having seemingly new insights. And I think that happens as we switch fields. We have new insights to the field that we go into. We bring together, we say we like multidisciplinary work. In reality, I'd say we don't. You have to embrace it. People have different expertises. You speak in different languages. It takes a while to do that, but the impact can be really profound. So with stroke detection and routing, because we want to route that ambulance to the hospital that can give them care, rather than bringing, by law in the US, ambulances are brought to the nearest hospital, which may or may not have even a rudimentary MR or CT machine. Then they're brought to the next hospital, then they're brought to the next hospital. Every time they're losing an hour and another hour. It's amazing. But the neurostimulation therapy for both all kinds of mental disease and neurodegenerative should come online around 2025. Glioblastoma, our early guidance from FDA is 2026. However, there's compassionate use because it is a death sentence, and we may be able to accelerate that. Again, most early there. We're in preclinical, which means we're not in humans yet. We hope to get into humans next year on this to get some early results and see what merits going further. And you know, the crass part of this is these are huge money makers too. Any one of these is a unicorn. Glio looks kind of small, glioblastoma, but if you consider all aggressive cancers, that's a lot of good that we can do. And think of it like the most expensive parts of a hospital are the surgical theaters and the imaging suites. But not only that, we've just lived through a 2.5-year pandemic where medicine became decentralized. And so can you get treatment at home? The reality for much of the world is they don't have medical imaging suites. Pick a very low income country. They're lucky if they have one medical imaging suite in the capital city. And so most people, the vast majority of humanity, are like I was in the early 90s, really sick, massive headaches, but I didn't get it. Like now we're the rich, we get to have those treatments, but not everybody does. Why not enable it? The consumer electronics supply chain needs something to do. The margins are even good, better than standard consumer electronics, so it works for everybody. But again, as a startup, you have to think of that. You have to figure out how to make change. It's so much, you don't even have to be a good manager if it's a mission that can change the world, because people will come together. I remember doing One Laptop Per Child. Citibank even volunteered to help. And we're like, what do we do with Citibank? And then we realized, oh, they could do our LIBOR for transferring funds from different currencies. And so they were happily doing that for nothing just to make it happen. You get executives from all over who want to help. You give them a cool job. You help them figure out, and you know, the crazy people of the world beat a path to your door, let them in, figure out what they can do. They all want to, you know, pick up an oar and make the thing go. So here's some of the places where we're doing clinical trials right now. It's sort of a growing and impressive array of clinical partners, and we're expanding that. We're every unit. I would have loved to bring a unit out here today, but a unit flew to Penn literally a couple days ago to scale up that trial. So where does this lead, though? Here's the question. Do we or don't we want to understand our brains? Because it's a really profound question. We could say, nope, don't want to know, bury head in sand. I think it's inevitable that we do. And what that does is enable low-cost healthcare for everybody, but also, in the limit, does enable non-invasive brain-computer interfaces. And by the way, we're not the only thing on the planet with brains. Not just dogs, but you know, octopuses are supposed to be smart. You know, what does diversity hiring start to mean in 100 years? We need facilities for the octopus to, you know, it's actually pretty interesting. We could get there. It might take that amount of time, and I think it is inevitable from where I sit. I don't think, again, I talked about the hardest thing in my life was my brain surgery. I don't see 1 billion people getting Elon's 1-inch hole in the skull anytime soon, but the non-invasive solutions are pretty promising for people with severe disease, people who didn't get our treatment for stroke, who need to communicate, other diseases that are vastly improved by having communication. And with that, we progressively understand more and more about how our brains work, which I think we're gonna, I mean, it happens. Countries in civil war kill all the teachers, you know, like we could shut it down for a while, but the people keep coming, right? So I think it's gonna happen. We are gonna be able to talk to each other. We have to take, one of my investors who helped me start Open Water said, you know, it's sort of like, it's inevitable, but we need to learn how to take swimming lessons. This is where the name of my company, Open Water, comes from. Swimming lessons to learn how to deal with our thoughts flowing like water, because they could, and so the normal things of politeness might slip through. And so we need tokenization, and who will you share what with, and teenagers will probably share everything, but what are your innermost thoughts? There's all kinds of things that you can think about. I just think it's coming. It's going to come first for people with brain disease. It's going to be kind of low resolution first, but I think it's going to be a bit like going from text-to-speech of 1999 to 2013. It's going to get good all of a sudden, and we'll say, wait, what? So just something to think about. What do we want it to be? Because we can control that. So in summary, I'm now, after 35 years, switched fields 6 years ago and building the future of neuro and wearables and collaborating really broadly. I know all of you are starting, or a lot of you are, some of you are investors, a lot of you have startups here. I think the only way to do something at scale is to partner with large companies, and I just want to thank LG Nova for making us sort of come here, inviting us, thank you for letting us come here, to think about how we do that in more effective ways, because it is challenging. There's a lot of people you need lots of rooms to understand what motivates everybody to get to yes. But thank you for your time, and I can't wait to learn more about your startups. I'm going to go to all your booths this morning. Thank you.
Well, we would love to ask you some questions. So anyone in the audience have a question? Yes, back here in the blue. Yep.
Hey, my name is John Bruber with Amorphix. So you just in the last 2 minutes touched on the perfect question, which is dealing with large companies coming from your background, which is basically coming with new ideas from different angles and selling those ideas to large companies. What's your technique for getting one human being in a large company to buy into a vision that's completely out of what they usually do?
You have to know what they want, I think. I think if you're solving one of the really big problems, most people are interested today, even in the environment. That probably wasn't true 5 years ago. Environment, education, how big, the big problems, they probably want to do it. Like for me in the consumer electronics supply chain, I had to get very wealthy executives at some of Asia's largest companies to say yes. You know, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, that part of Asia was poorer than Africa.
Right.
Those executives knew what computing did to not just their lives, but everybody in their countries. They wanted a reason to do it.
Yeah.
It had to stack up, but they were kind of on my side.
Yeah.
They asked the tough questions, and the thing is to be grateful to them, and when you don't have the answer, say, can I come back and have another meeting with you? Like, so I think the things we're all trying to do are so big and so important, but we do have to make sure we address the issues that company has, their current agendas, all of the things that. The other thing is eat a lot. Like once I get in, I have breakfast, lunch, and dinner from the janitor to the CEO, everybody across, to find out like what's the thing they're not telling me because it's rude. To find out, it's sometimes rude to tell you, and I just want to find out in a quiet way that this is brewing or this is brewing, so that you can get in front of it and make sure that it doesn't derail your project in a month, in 6 months.
Maybe a different way of asking it is that how long did you have to mine at one of these opportunities to actually make enough progress to get somebody with some level of authority attention?
To summit, which one? I mean, it's interesting. I've been wanting to do this project since I joined the faculty of MIT in 2005. I just thought I could get a $100 laptop done faster, so I decided to do that. But you know, the thing I do, it's nice I'm on the stage. People invite me to speak. I don't think I'm a great speaker, but thank you for inviting. But like if you get on the stage, you're findable. So I end up doing that because you need the people, the like-minded people with different skill sets to be at a path to your door. So how do they find you? Kind of hard in pandemic. Again, thank you, LG Nova, for bringing us together. So how do you actually do that? How do you, I think it's a bit of a random walk, but you could sort of look and sort of pick I also sort of look at lists of things or create lists of things or do searches and say, one of these 100 people or companies might be interested. How do I soft approach them? And I work on that. I mean, it's hard.
A question right here.
Thank you for speaking. It was so
Inspiring.
triggering brain. So for the brain surgery, because I started in '91 thinking about epilepsy, and I'm still working in digital health. So what are the main things that you are thinking is important to be breakthrough for the understanding of the brain? Because you see that Google started with deep learning, and they want to apply to everything. It doesn't work that way. So the way that the brain, you think the neural structure and reinforcement and the winner take all and those things, have you think about the next thing that is breakthrough?
A lot of questions. So on Google Brain and the thinking that the brain's the neurons, very interesting. I'm reading a 30-year-old book about Alan Turing. They thought that back in the late 40s, and it took actually a neurosurgeon to get on stage for a famous lecture in London to say, there's so much more than the neurons. There's the endocrine system. There's a lot of things going on that cause thought. Emotions strongly influence our thought, for example. So to quote the late Paul Allen, the co-founder of Microsoft, he felt there were 5 Nobel Prizes just to understand how a neuron works. To which I would, tongue-in-cheek, say to Paul, well, great, Paul, you go get those Nobel Prizes. Sadly, he passed away. But people don't understand how computers work, but can use them. We can see how clumps of neurons firing have patterns, and so that can be really helpful for decoding speech, images, words people are about to say, their dreams, and so forth. As has been shown, using graduate students in MRI machines for over a decade now. In terms of really getting at these things, there's so much in the academy for many decades that leads us to this moment. The way I feel I can help, and some of the other startups, big companies, we probably know better how to make the device than the academy or the grad student that's never shipped anything before. Most of the great new ideas come from the academy. They publish, we get to see them. There's patents, we know how to collaborate with those, but can we make it happen faster for these diseases or for these dreams? And I think that we can, and I think it's a moment where people are ready for it. You see, Elon makes a lot of noise. We can use that. He's a good, whatever you think of him, he's great at PR, for sure. And that's helpful, I think, to have. But the second half of your question was, how do you innovate? I don't know.
Oh, we have one more question over there. A gentleman raised his hand before we let Mary Lou go.
Hi, Mary Lou. My name is Keith. I'm from Scanopathy. And I want to say, first and foremost, you're an inspiration to all of us, not just as startup people or tech people, just as a human. So thank you very much for the work that you do. I've got a relatively loaded question for you, but I hope you can answer it. A lot of us care about access to healthcare.
Yeah.
And what you're doing can help a lot of people. But knowing that the industry that you're working in, it can end up costing a lot of people a lot of money and therefore be prohibitive.
Right.
So have you thought about how you can drive access for this so that the average person can get it?
Lasers going into LiDAR systems. The whole LiDAR systems are targeted to cost $500 near term, then even lower than that. The camera chips we're using, they cost $1 today. Put those together, got a $100 module. That's pretty cheap. You go into a hospital around here, the nearest hospital to my house is UCSF, the next one's Stanford. You look around, I've spent a lot of time in hospitals. Everything they look at is at least $10,000, a lot of them $100,000, a lot of them $1 million. So yeah, it needs to be lower cost. You make it up on volume. For every 10x more you ship in consumer electronics, the cost goes down by 10x. And guess what? A lot of the trillion-dollar manufacturing infrastructure is living and breathing at 2-4% margin. Fine, make 20% margin. That's fine. Make 50% margin as it starts, but help by putting the A team, design teams on this to perfect the manufacturing processes for this, because it does change what is 20% of the GDP in this country, on average in the world, 10%. It's the largest industry in the world, healthcare. It's too expensive, not enough people get good healthcare, so we can lower the cost and make it better and fill that trillion-dollar manufacturing supply chain as everybody's bought their new laptops and so forth in pandemic, and so we see some surplus now. That's the basic idea. So yes, 100% agree.
Well, let's have a big hand for Mary Lou Jepson. Oh my God, so wonderful. Oh, you want to do one more? One more? Okay, we're going to do one more.
Okay. Oh, thanks for letting me ask. Thank you for being here today. I want to be you when I grow up. This is wonderful. My name is Maria Patterson. I'm an entrepreneur in residence on the incubation team here at LG Nova. And you said something really interesting when you're talking about Citibank and the crazies knocking on your door to pick up the ore. Is there commonality? I'm very interested in incentivizing good behavior. Do they want credit for this? If they're doing stuff for free, do they want their employees to feel good? Or why is it that people come knocking on your door?
In the case of the laptop project, it was actually an education project. There were a lot of awards, but the award, and this is no joke, the award that meant the most to all of us was seeing the kids' education change. And we basically throw away half the kids that are born in the world, in that they don't get anything any of us would consider to be an education. And if we can help change that, that was the biggest reward, I think, to Citibank or the rest of them. And sure, they got awards, or maybe it got on their promo package, or I don't really know. But I think also for me, like when I could motivate, I would get these great teams at various manufacturers throughout Asia, and for them, they would just work harder on the project. It wasn't just another product. It was a mission that could, if we pulled it off, be the most impactful project of their career. And so they just worked harder on it, and they didn't fight for credit, and they didn't do the normal, again, you don't actually have to be a good manager. If you give everybody a mission, they can work together for it. And it doesn't have to be a war. It could be something as impactful as giving children with little or no opportunity some opportunity, or transforming healthcare, or things like that, which are needed and make a lot of companies a lot of money as well, because probably more margin than currently being made, and everybody's happy. So yes, can you solve that nut? I'm not saying it's easy to solve, but that sometimes you can.
A great question to end the keynote, mission-driven innovation. Thank you so much, Mary Lou Jepsen. Thank you. So great.